Hey, everybody. You probably noticed me walking around earlier and had a look on my shoes, right? These ones. All the way to the back. You can see them. So I bought these shoes because they are obviously really good-looking shoes, as you can see here. But the main reason I bought these shoes is because they are 100% emission compensated. 100% emission compensated. Every time I see this number, 100%, I ask myself, how do we know? You know, I've worked with data all my career, and I have worked with what they call data quality. And 100% is something admirable and often unreachable. And still, this company said 100% emission compensated. So I started really looking into this and was thinking, what is it actually that they want to express with this? What are these 100% of emissions? And it really brought me to this life-leading question and to this question that is now haunting me since 9 months of what are the emissions connected to this very shoe? And since I knew I would come here, and there's a room full of smart people, I thought to myself, I bring this question to you in the form of a little thumbs up, thumbs down game. And I will give you a few examples, and you tell me if these emissions are emissions that are connected to my shoe and that should be compensated to advertise them as 100% emission compensated. Let's start with the forklift. A diesel forklift in a warehouse where this shoe is stored. The diesel has emissions. Thumbs up or thumbs down? Should this be part of the emissions of my shoe? OK, we go a step farther. The store has a shop management system. The shop management system is running on servers. You know how these things work. The emissions of these servers, connected to my shoe? Yes or no? I get clear yeses here. OK, smart people in the room, I get the feeling. Let's get to me driving my 20-year-old diesel car to the Jungfernstieg, picking up these shoes, and then driving with this car back. Emissions. OK, there's some doubt now starting to be. The commute of the people that live in Portugal and commute every single day to the factory to produce these shoes, commute of the workers, part of the emissions. Ooh, doubts, we're getting doubts. Interesting situation. The designers of Berlin that fly into Portugal to see the prototype and then fly back. OK, we got some no's in the back. Nice one. OK. The good thing is, while we are smart people, there's been another group of smart people, and they call themselves the World Resource Institute. And in 1998, they published the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. And in the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, they defined emission clusters. And these emission clusters can be used to differentiate what is part of the emissions connected to your product and what is not part. And I think we kind of good on there. Let's go through the scopes a little bit. Scope 1, these are emissions directly connected to your product, to your company. If you stop existing tomorrow, if you stop producing tomorrow as a company, these emissions will not be emitted, like the diesel forklift. Scope 2 is something that you don't have that much influence on, while energy is a bit of a difficult one. Distance heating, there it's clear. You're using distance heating. You don't have influence on how this heating is generated, but you still need it. And they would probably still use their distance heating even if you go bankrupt from one day to the other. So distance heating in scope 2, indirect emissions. And scope 3, for most products and most companies, the biggest scope of emissions is everything upstream or downstream, all the services surrounding your product. All the services surrounding your product that are needed to bring this product to the final customer. One of these services is transportation. And ladies, at this point, you must be wondering, why would I be here and talk about emission? Let me introduce myself. I'm Jonas. I'm a NetLight consultant. I'm an engineer, but most for all, I'm passionate about this planet. I've built a career in renewable energy, and I now moved on into a new adventure, and that is I recently, 9-month-long, built an transport emission tracking, calculation, and management application for one of the leading freight forwarders of this world. And today, I want to share some observations. So if you ever find yourself at home and thinking, hey, I would like to build a transport management emission management application, here's a good insights. Okay, transport emissions are coming from transport operations. Before we jump into my observations, let's look a bit at a realistic transport operation. For example, bringing the leather from Argentina to Portugal. And I don't want to make it too complicated here because we don't have the time for that. Let's make it really easy. Let's say we have 15 tons of goods. We transported them on pallets in a container. We have non-cooled goods. We are using a ship called Ever Given. The truck in Portugal is electrified. The transshipment emissions in the Portuguese warehouse are known, but the transshipment emissions in the Argentinian warehouses are not known. And obviously, we're using the newest version of the ISO 14083, just to keep things a bit simple here. And the question really is, how would you go about it? You're all developers or people interested in tech. How would you go about it? Well, take pictures. This is what you do. You build an architecture around it. You build a product. You have services that track GPS vessels around the world, that work with the data quality issues of GPS vessels that travel around the world through areas where there is no Wi-Fi, no internet, no whatsoever. You have terminal-to-terminal shipments, and you know the emissions of some of these terminals sometimes, and you incorporate that into one of your microservices. And you have a compensation tool, because in the end, you want to offset the emissions that are generated. So you have a compensation that you sell previous to the shipment, but that you only certify when the shipment actually has arrived, but not in those cases where these shipments don't arrive. And you build all of that. And I would really like to dive into this, because as somebody who develops these things, you probably know how this is. You get proud, but we don't have the time to really dive into why we used Kafka instead of RabbitMQ, if that is a question here, or why we, in the end, decided for Snowflake instead of other tech stack here. What I would like to jump into are a few observations. Observation 1 is a bit about the product evolution. This is how this product that we designed started out. Emission calculation for the company I'm working at was only something that was used for the customer portal. Customers would see in their customer portal, oh, there's a nice emission value, and then they would do really nothing with it because there are no real business processes attached to it. Well, it was a nice to have value, and this is where we are 4 years later. Emission calculation really did explode. The stakeholder group increased dramatically. We have now key account reporting in there. We have compensation tools in there. We have the legal governance in there. We have external audits that do their audits. We have still the beautiful customer portal, financial reporting, and CSRD reports. And it really shows what can happen if you start with something that is kind of like an MVP in the sustainability room, and then over time, the pressure on your product is increasing, the stakeholder group is increasing. And that was a bit about the product. About the industry evolution, there's an observation that is still stuck with me. You remember this. The logistics operation to bring this leather to Portugal. The easy version of it. I didn't even tell you the emissions yet, and I see in your eyes that you're curious to know how much CO2 actually was emitted. Well, here's the answer. It's not that easy, obviously. There are different norms in different countries. There are different versions of these norms. There are different interpretations of these norms. You really get to the point where emissions are this weird thing that you try to calculate, but then through the change of a few business logics and a few logics in the background, you really transition between these values. And what am I meaning by this? These are 3 questions that are currently keeping me up at night. Let's go on the first one. Should the weight of a container be taken into the account in the emission calculation? Okay, we get a clear yes here. ISO says nope. Should passenger airplanes, listen to me, this is difficult. Should passenger airplanes report lower CO2e values per ton kilometer than cargo airplanes for the same transported good? We got no's, we got yeses, we got all of that. Well, ISO is not clear. So that's a decision, right? ISO is not clear. That means the company that is implementing this, me, for that matter, we need to make a decision. Well, we opted for ICAO. That's a different norm, but at least they are clear about it. If we know that a comparable warehouse has emissions higher than the ISO standard, should we adhere to the ISO standard, or should we use the emissions that the comparable warehouse uses? ISO, use ISO. That's a general rule with ISO norms, if you ever work with ISO norms. If you don't use the ISO, then you lose your certification. But this brought us to the situation where we knew we are emitting more emissions, but still we are reporting less because that is what is needed if you're conform to ISO. And really, what after 9 months I realized, 9 months long, I really tried to narrow emission calculation down. And then I prepared this talk and I finally realized emission values are just an approximation and they will always be just an approximation. But then I told you earlier, authorities do care. Like, that's kind of difficult to get your head around. You try to approximate something and then authorities try to tell you if your approximation is right or wrong. And for us, as a developer, this was new. We worked in banking before, in energy trading before, and there it's really easy. You put in $1 on one side, and you get $1 distributed somehow, and you run that through your system, and you can really do end-to-end. With emission calculation, we tackled the problem differently. We went into full transparency mode. Every single of these decisions that I told you earlier are well documented in code, and you can really narrow down where we make this decision. And if you change this, we have really included A/B testing to show business units if you change from one norm to the other, if you include the empty weight of containers, this is what happens in the end to your emission values. And with that, we were able to really convince authorities that even so we don't know if we are doing exactly the right thing, we're at least very transparent. And if they know better, we're easy to adjust to this. 2 observations. I hope you feel a bit equipped in building your own transport management application in the background. There is, we got this stakeholder group that explodes. We got these authorities that care. We got these big freight forwarders that now start building transport emission management applications. And this really leaves me with a conclusion that makes me happy. Sustainability is finally becoming business critical, and that's a good thing. The only thing, and I see this in your eyes, the only thing is I didn't came here to talk about business criticality, right? I didn't went on a 9-month adventure to build a transport emission management application to talk about business criticality. I wanted to figure out the emissions of my shoe. Well, and here it is. I can now definitely say my shoe is most definitely not exactly 100% emission compensated, but ideally, it's overcompensated, except beginning next year, this will not be allowed anymore. And with that, I would like to end my talk. If you want to have a discussion about emissions, if you want to have a discussion about energy trading, or of my other passion, a discussion on kitesurfing, happy to discuss.